Okay, good evening, members. Now, before we start tonight's meeting, this is the first meeting that councillors of all parties have gathered together since the sad events of last Friday. And I know that all of us across the whole political spectrum were deeply shocked by the passing of Sir David Amos, a public servant who served his constituents so faithfully for many years. In discussion with the Vice Chairman and also this afternoon with the Mayor, I would like, therefore, to invite all members and officers to just join us before the start of the meeting in remembering Sir David and the life serving others. So if you'd like to join me just in a moment's silence. Thank you, members, for that. I take the opportunity to welcome all of you to tonight's meeting and also Councillor Mansfield, who is joining us remotely. So let's go to item number 1, which is apologies for absence.
We've received apologies from absence from Councillor Lewis. If anyone else has got any other apologies, happy to take them now.
Are there any other apologies? Okay, apologies from Councillor Skipper. Thank you. I think that's everybody. Let's move on then to the minutes of the last meeting, which is on page 3 of the agenda. Can I ask, are you happy with the accuracy of those minutes, and would you be happy if I sign them? Does anybody wish to object to that? No. Okay, I better sign the correct ones this time. Thank you very much. Item 3, declarations of interest. Does any member have any declarations of interest you wish to make? Nope. Thank you very much. So we'll go on now to item number 4, Draft Gambling Act 2005 Statement of Policy, which you can find on page 11 of the report. And Mrs. Lolly is going to introduce this for us.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Chairman. The Gambling Act 2005 requires licensing authorities to prepare and publish a statement of principles that sets out the principles we propose to apply when exercising our licensing functions under the Act. The statement applies for 3 years, after which time it must be reviewed and a new statement of principles published once it has been adopted by full council. Our current statement of principles expires on the 31st of January 2022. We have therefore started the process required to update and publish a new statement. The current statement has been reviewed in accordance with the appropriate regulations and with reference to the Gambling Commission's updated guidance, which was published in April this year. Although the guiding principles remain largely unchanged, there is a greater emphasis on the requirement for local risk assessments to be prepared and kept under review by the licensees. There is also a recommendation, not a requirement, that the licensing authority develops a local area profile to assist licensees in developing and maintaining their own risk assessments. A local area profile will enable operators to have a better awareness of the local area and risks. We are therefore proposing to develop a local area profile in the near future. This would then be reflected in future statements of principles. In developing an LAP, we would proactively engage with responsible authorities as well as other organisations who may have an input into mapping local risks. This could include public health, housing, community welfare groups and safety partnerships, education, amongst others. Our own team within here in Surrey Heath Organisational Development will be involved in developing the LAP. As part of the work on our statement of principles, we are required to consult with a wide range of people and organisations as set out in the report. I would say at this point that we are happy to add to our list of consultees. As a result of a meeting on Monday, we were asked to add collectively Camberley, and we have already added them to the list of consultees. So if you have any ideas of who else it may be appropriate to consult with, please feel free to let us know. If given the go-ahead tonight, we are planning to commence consultation on the draft revised statement of principle the week commencing November the 8th. Consultation will last a minimum of 6 weeks. As part of that consultation, all ward councillors will be contacted and invited to comment on the draft statement. The results of the consultation will be reported back to the licensing committee in February, including, where necessary, a revised draft statement of principles. At that stage, we would be asking committee to recommend the final statement of principles should be adopted by full council at their meeting later on in February 2022. So tonight we are asking and seeking approval for us to go out to consultation on the draft revised statement of principles as outlined in the report and as attached as appendices. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lolly. Does any member have any question or comments they wish to make about this? Councillor Deach.
Thank you, Chairman. What I wasn't entirely sure on, and I welcome the idea of the risk policies and so on, but what I wasn't entirely sure on, and perhaps you could help me, is, so let's say after you've consulted, an area is identified as at risk for some of the reasons that are mentioned in the report. Does that mean then that when, let's say for instance, and I'll use a betting shop as an example, decides they want to open up on Dettingen Park in Deepcut, which is where I live, but that area has been identified as somewhere at risk. Does that mean then that the licensing committee could potentially turn down that application?
I think it's something that we would probably need to look closely, because the idea is to protect the vulnerable, really. And so, you know, if there are things that we could put in place that protects the vulnerable in that particular area, then it may be an option and it may not be an option. But when you look at the guidance isn't particularly specific of how you look at how you would develop these LAP. It's just something that is recognised as good practice.
Yes, sure.
Thank you. So, but I'm still not clear. I mean, yeah, it's, you know, it's a nice thing to do, but in practical terms, I don't understand exactly how it would benefit our residents. And perhaps you could give me some examples of where that might be applied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what would actually happen is that you'd have a local area profile which identifies that there may be risks, and I think in a borough like this is probably going to be very low risks. So, you know, how significant it would be, and I'm guessing here because we don't know. But what it would allow to happen is it would allow the operators themselves to assess the risk and put in place perhaps mitigation to prevent that risk. Or to limit it, really, because, you know, if you have and the guidance itself talks about schools, you know, if you have gambling premises near schools, there are certain things that you wouldn't want to be happening, you know, within that premises. And I was talking to Paula earlier today, and we were talking about advertising. Well, advertising is a moot point in terms of what gambling premises can do anyway. But, you know, you wouldn't necessarily advertise that service in the locality of a school or something, you know. So it's something that will need to be developed. And, you know, when I was doing this work, you look at the number of licensed gambling premises, it's actually quite small. So I think I could anticipate that it would be useful for operators and useful for us, because the additional thing, of course, that if you've got a premises in a say a low, medium, high risk, that we could target our own resources that way. So it would help us all.
So before I bring you back in, Councillor Deach, actually the point you raised was one that was raised earlier this week, and I gave the example of Old Dean. And some of you who may know historically in Old Dean will know the parade, will know there was a betting shop there. I think there may even have been more than one. And the question would then be that should there be those sorts of facilities which are very near local schools, as Councillor Garrett would know, then to what degree would that be relevant within that? And as has been explained by our officers, this is quite complicated areas, and it's early to say, and every area is going to be different. So it's impossible to say whether Old Dean would be the same as Lettingham Park or St Paul's or Lightwater or anywhere else. So I think it's really at this stage as a committee to say we are looking at this, or we'd like to encourage to look at this in terms of local risk assessment in particular areas. Particularly on page 43, you'll see the kind of areas that we may be looking at. Is there high crime, for example, in an area? Profile, location of services for children. Is it next to a playground? Those sorts of things are ones that perhaps maybe not necessarily have been considered as much as they could have been. So hopefully that will help. But yes, Councillor Deach.
That helps a lot, actually. Thank you very much. The only other thing I would suggest is that, I mean, I have to say, I have some experience with, let's say, people who are close to me who have had major problems with gambling. In fact, one person lost their home, lost their family home as a result of it. And that there are others who have been profoundly affected by it too. And I don't know whether it could be incorporated into it that if somebody goes to one of these licensed establishments and identifies an individual to them who is as having a problem, could there be something in that risk assessment, let's say, on how they deal with that appropriately? Because I think that, you know, licensed landlords, if somebody's too drunk, for instance, they have the ability to say no and not serve them. I think the same should apply to gambling establishments. Hope I've been clear in my representation. Thank you.
No, I think you have, Councillor Deach. I think this policy is going to be going out to consultation. That may be a point that you wish to reflect upon and feedback. I think you're referring to what, if anything, can be done to address vulnerable people. We're not here to make moral judgments about gambling. People have different views about that, but as a council, we're here to try and make sure there's a policy to ensure that. So,
one last thing is that, you know, the people that I know have been affected by gambling are not what we would normally consider as vulnerable. In fact, one of them had a fantastic job, earns probably 3 or 4 times what I earn, you know, but was vulnerable as a result of his addiction. So, yeah, just thought I'd make that point. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to make any comment or ask any questions about this? I can't see any. So if I take you back to page 11, the recommendation of the Licensing Committee is advised to note the contents of the report and to approve the attached draft revised statement of principles 2022 to 2025 for consultation. And as officers have outlined, if there are groups that you think should be consulted, please do let them know. Can I therefore ask for you to raise your hand if you're in agreement with that? Thank you very much. I can confirm that's unanimous. So if I go on now to page 47, where we will be, this is the one problem with a paper one. We're going on to review of Hackney Carriage taxi fares. And again, Mrs. Lolly is going to introduce this one.
Thank you again, Chairman. Can I just start by addressing a couple of amendments to, first of all, to Annex C. One of the things that this particular annex is looking at is a comparison of our proposed fare rate per mile with other local authorities. I just wanted to make quite clear that the rate that we are proposing for us is £4.60 per mile, and that's the comparison that we're looking at. You know, so to make it easier for you, it picks up on something you said earlier. The other thing is when you look at the fuel prices, I'd like to make it quite clear that the fuel prices chart is in pence per litre. And in 2015, the pence per litre should read 116.5 rather than 16.5, because we'd all want to go back to 2015 if we could, I'm sure. The other thing that I'd like to say is that this evening we've circulated a revised Annex E. All right, and I would like you to refer to that. That's a very important document because this is the one that we'll be going out to consultation on. And there are some amendments to Tariff 4, the festive period, and the first 2 lines of those tariffs have been altered to reflect what we are proposing. So it's now first 1,210 yards is £7.20, and then the next tariff is £2 rather than the ones in the report. So. Okay, I hope that's okay for everybody. Right, so turning to the report, the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1976 allows both districts and borough councils to set local taxi fares. You may recall that at the July licensing committee, we provided details of the process that should be followed when reviewing these fares. The committee was advised that as a first step, we had notionally increased our fares by the annual consumer price index. For each year, 2012 to 2021. 2012 is significant because that's the last year that when the fares were reviewed. The revised uplifted fare chart was shared with the committee in July. A copy of this chart is included as Annex B, but it is purely for information now at this stage because we won't be referring to it again apart from the way we used it to calculate it. Following committee in July, and as agreed at committee, we shared a copy of the proposed fares, Annex B. I've mentioned it again, I said I wasn't going to, but I have, with members of the taxi trade, who were invited to comment on the proposed uplifted fares and the methodology used. As a result, we received 4 written and 2 verbal responses from the trade. The written responses are provided as Annex D in your report. The responses were considered, and we considered them with both the chair and vice chair of the committee. And it was suggested that we go with the original uplifted figures as the basis, only the basis for calculating the final recommended proposed fares, because we recognise that there is a further opportunity to look at this once we've gone out to consultation on it. Using the figures provided in Annex B, we've developed a fare chart, Annex E, which is you have a new copy of, that we are proposing to use as part of the consultation process. These figures have in some cases been rounded, and I would like to reassure you that in all cases they've been rounded downwards, so that's in favour of who they're providing the service for. This is considered necessary to facilitate updating the meters once the final fares have been agreed by the licensing committee. It's quite a complicated process, and I wouldn't like to have to explain that. But if you want further explanation, I'm sure Paula would. Depending on the outcome of tonight's meeting, we are planning to do a number of things. Right. We are planning to place a notice, including a copy of Annex E in the local newspaper, giving 14 days for comment on the proposed updated fare chart. The notice will be put in the local newspaper in January 22. There is a delay to that so that we can tie in with the licensing committee meeting schedule, because at the end of the consultation period, we have 2 months, or you more correctly, the committee has 2 months to consider any comments made. And so we need to fall within that 2 months. So advertising them in January gives us the opportunity to bring it back to the February committee. Copies of the notice, including the annex, will be placed on the council's website, providing a further opportunity for comment, because I think last time somebody mentioned, well, who reads the new local newspaper? So, it will be further advertised. Yeah. If no objections are received, or where objections are made but subsequently withdrawn, the new fares, as outlined, will come into effect. However, if we receive objections, these will be presented to the licensing committee in February, together with any further amendments to the fare chart. Following the committee in February, any further recommended changes to the fare chart will be made if members of the committee would like us to make changes, and these fares will come into effect. The meters then will be updated when appropriate. We are therefore tonight seeking committee approval for the proposed taxi fare chart, Annex E, to be advertised in the local newspaper. You're also asked to note the steps that will be taken once the proposed fare chart has been advertised. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Solly. And just to reaffirm, the Annex E that we're referring to tonight is the sheet which is before you, rather than that which was circulated round. I can see Councillor Garrett first, then Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions, really. First one, you said that.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. That's right. You said there were 4 respondents to the consultation. How many did we send it out to? Just so I can get some perspective of the amount of people that actually replied.
We sent it out to all the taxi trade. And how many is that? 300? No, about 80 people.
Okay, so you had 4 respondents and you sent it out to 80 people.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And the second one was reference the advertising. I know we brought it up before. I suspect that the best also would be worth doing a social media post on that as well, because I think, as we alluded to, very rarely do people read the news these days. So if we could do a social media post on it, and I'm sure us councillors will be able to share that as well. Thank you.
Councillor White.
It's just one of the letters or one of the emails in there from one of the taxi drivers or taxi companies indicated that the price rise might not be a good idea because of Uber. Do they have to actually apply these price rises, or is it up to their discretion to not apply them?
The meters will be updated to reflect the proposed fares, but they are maximum figures. So it's the maximum they're allowed to charge. They can charge what they would consider appropriate.
Councillor Deitch.
Thank you. Actually, I obviously, as councillors, our primary concern is our residents and the residents that we represent, and make sure that they're not getting ripped off, make sure that when they're in taxis, they're safe, and all the rest of it. But also, I think we also have a duty to the taxi drivers themselves, under what must be incredibly difficult trading conditions at the moment, with, as you've alluded to in some of the reports, the price of fuel, COVID and everything else. So I'm just keen actually to hear from Councillor Bates and Councillor Adams, because they attended this meeting where some representatives from the trade were present, and I'd just really like to get a sense of what you felt in terms of how supportive or not they were with these proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Deitch. Yeah, myself and Councillor Bates were at those. I attended the second one. There was 2 sittings of it, and I found that most of the attendees of those were very much in agreement with the proposals as they were going ahead. There was a lot of talk as well about Uber and these, exactly what Mrs. Lolly was talking about there. These are the maximum fares that they have to. They don't have to charge these. It's entirely up to them, but they can actually go up to these amounts. So I think they were quite happy with those.
And I would echo that. What happened is, although we had a relatively low number of respondents to this consultation, you remember when we had the taxi licensing policy, there was a lot of different discussion. A number of those people took the opportunity to comment then about fares. They chose not to make a second representation because I suspect they probably thought they made it the first time. So there were 2 Zoom meetings, and those people who did attend, I think, were in the main content with what is being proposed. I think there was one driver in particular who also made a representation who suggested this wasn't the time to do that. But on balance, and it is obviously for a committee decision, these haven't gone up since 2000, or haven't been reviewed since 2012, and they are maximum fares. So if that driver or that firm wish to charge less, they have the absolute right to do so. Are there any other questions or comments that anyone wishes to make? Nope. Oh, sorry. Yes, Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just interested to know, and if anybody can advise, how many Uber drivers are there in our area? We know there are 80 that are licensed Hackney drivers, but I wonder how many Uber drivers there are and what's happening to the trend there, please.
I can answer the first part because I took a guidance from Mrs. Barnshaw behind you, but we don't know how many Uber drivers there are. We were going to be having a follow-up meeting with Uber a few weeks, 2 weeks ago, I think, but unfortunately it had to be cancelled on the day due to unforeseen circumstances. We are looking at having a follow-up meeting with Uber. I'm happy that we ask that question and that we circulate that information, if that is available, to members of the committee. What I would bear in mind is it may not necessarily be easily available because you'll have residents who are Uber drivers, and then you'll have others who are not residents of our borough but live in Blackwater or elsewhere who also operate in our borough. But we're happy to ask that question, Councillor Fitzgerald, and I don't know about the trends, but maybe we can ask that as well. But unfortunately, as we discussed, I think at a previous meeting, they are outside of the control of what we're referring to here. Are there any other questions? No? Okay, so if I go to page 47, and the recommendation is for advice to note the contents of the report and to approve the new proposed taxi fares as provided in Annex C for advertising a local newspaper. And we're recommended to note the steps that will be taken once the fares are advised. And we're also being recommended in the future, taxi fares are reviewed by the licensing committee regularly. We haven't specified a time frame for that, but certainly less than 9 years, depending on the prevailing economic climate. Councillor Gout?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at wording. Is it possible we can make that advertising in local media rather than just specifically newspaper?
I believe it's statutory, but Mrs. Barnshaw, Mrs. Lolly, is that correct? Can I just ask you to use your mic, just for the benefit of anyone who may be?
Yeah, it's a statutory requirement to go into local newspaper, but you could say local newspaper and social media.
Do that.
I'd personally be happy for that to be added to the recommendation. We have to do the local newspaper part, but and local media. Are you happy if that is amended? I can see nods to that. So with that amended, can I ask for your agreement for the recommendation on page 47? Thank you. Is there anybody against? Are there any abstentions? Okay, thank you very much. That's been passed overwhelmingly. If we go on then to item number 6, which is the Food Safety Service Plan 2021-22, which I'm going to ask Mrs. Soper to introduce for us.
Thank you, Chairman. The purpose of this report is to consider for approval by the committee the attached draft Food Safety Service Plan for 2021-22. This committee has seen food safety service plans come before it on an annual basis. The enforcement of food safety law is one of the council's statutory functions, and the Food Standard Agency is the national competent authority for the arrangement of official food controls, and they have issued statutory guidance on how official controls should be carried out within the Food Law Code of Practice, and also within a framework agreement on local authority food law enforcement. The FSA requires all food authorities to have a food safety service plan to ensure that national priorities and standards are addressed and delivered locally. And it is advised that the plan is submitted to the relevant member forum for approval to ensure local transparency and accountability. Therefore, the draft food safety service plan for Surrey Heath 2021-22 is attached to Annex A. The timing of the drafting of the plan has been decided to take account the Food Standard Agency COVID-19 Local Authority Recovery Plan, which they have produced in recognition that the COVID pandemic has changed the way that environmental health services have been able to deliver their food safety services. And the plan sets out guidance and advice to local authorities on how to deliver the food service in the period between July 21 and up to 2023-24. The plan requires the service to prioritise the activities according to risk. Therefore, the draft plan that you have before you, it follows the format of previous years, where it describes the scope of the service, which is the inspection of food premises and the delivery of the food hygiene rating scheme, the investigation of complaints regarding food premises and food poisoning cases, sampling of food, promotion and advice on good food safety practice to businesses, and also the support that we give to 6 primary authority food safety partnerships that we have in the borough. Within the plan, some of the key elements are that Surrey Heath is responsible for enforcing food laws in 706 food businesses in the borough. And we have seen an increase in the number of registered food businesses in 2021, largely due to a number of new home-based food businesses that have arisen out of the lockdown. The normal food inspection programme was disrupted by the COVID pandemic in terms of business lockdowns and the requirement for social distancing. However, the food safety team did manage to carry out 136 on-site food safety inspections and also investigate 57 complaints about food or food premises and investigate 75 foodborne infectious disease cases. And this was in addition to the new COVID-19 business restriction work that the team also was carrying out. However, the service does have some backlog of inspections, but we have devised a food safety inspection programme that will ensure that we meet the FSA's requirements to have our inspection programme fully realigned with the original required inspection frequencies by the end of March 2023. The borough continues to have a good standard of food businesses, and one of our indicators in the annual plan is the percentage of food premises achieving a food hygiene rating of 3, 4 or 5. We have a target of 95%, and the current ratings are 96.6%. And there are only a small number of premises that have scored less than a 3, and actually 78% of food businesses in the borough have a 5 rating, which is the highest rating. The plan also reviews the way the service has been delivered in terms of the quality of inspections, and also it reviews the fact that whilst we intended to carry out sampling activities in 2021, due to limited capacity at the laboratories and the difficulties in accessing premises, food sampling activities were suspended, but they will be recommenced in the current year. So the recommendation is that the licensing committee is advised to resolve that the Food Safety Service Plan 2021-2022 attached to Annex A to this report is approved. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Soper. And before I ask members in the room, I could see that Councillor Mansfield has his hand up, so I'm going to introduce him first. I could see Councillor Garrett as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mrs. Soper, for that update. Members, there's a couple of things that, as obviously the officer said, this is a statutory function to actually have the food safety service plan for 21 to 22. But there's a couple of points I'd just like to draw you to on the hard copies. Is page 83 under section 6. It defines the fact that, and I thank all the officers for this fact, that for their commitments during the recent pandemic, for the amount of resources that were put in to deliver the programme. And there's a breakdown of that on item 24.3. So I do pass on to Mrs. Soper my thanks to yourself and all of your team for continuing to liaise with businesses, during these extraordinary times, and also to continue to maintain services. As stated, there's 706 businesses within the borough, and I think that it's been an outstanding job that they have maintained the service throughout. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Garrett.
Thank you. I'll start by echoing Councillor Mansfield's. I mean, there's obviously a lot of work been going on in some very difficult times. I've just really got two very simple questions. On page 77, 12.1, table 2, the total adds up to 692, yet we've got 706 premises. So I just wondered why there was a discrepancy there. I'm sure it's something very simple that I've missed. And then on page 78, 12.6, the hygiene rating. I was wondering if it'd be possible to have a breakdown of the number of businesses in each area. So we could just have a little table which says those that are at 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I know it's not in here and I'm not expecting it tonight, but if that's something we could see, if that's at all possible, I would be grateful. Thank you.
Yes, certainly that is a breakdown that we can make available and can be circulated to members of the committee. In terms of the discrepancy, I'm just trying to find in the plan. Sorry, where did you refer to the 600?
Sorry, so it's page 77, table 2, under 12.1. The total there for the risk business profile is 692, and there's 706 businesses. So I'm just wondering if there maybe was some that weren't in that at the time. I just wondered why there was some that maybe weren't there. Sorry to be.
Thank you. Yeah, can I just ask my colleague Nafita Fleet to answer that question?
Sorry, the numbers doesn't match because some of the food business has not been inspected. And therefore, if you're not inspected, we don't know what the category of risk they are. That makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that. We didn't actually ask that on Monday, so that was a good point that was raised. Councillor Deitch.
Thank you. First of all, just wanted to say, well, echo the comments of Councillor Mansfield and Garrett about the service. It's clear you've had some major challenges over the pandemic, so thank you for all your work. You know, residents say to us all the time, don't they, you know, what do we get for our council tax kind of thing? And, you know, there's these services are the sort of hidden services, so to speak, I think, that most people don't know that go on or take for granted. I like nothing more after a council meeting going to the kebab shop and having a kebab. So I'm very happy that I know I can go there with confidence and know that I'm not going to get food poisoning. And that's down to the work that you guys do. So thank you. However, could I ask you, have reports of incidents, let's say, of food poisoning gone up as a result of the challenges that the service has faced, and that the fact that you are, let's say, doing less inspections and so on? You know, has word got out that we're an easy touch, perhaps, because of the challenges? And, you know, I just want to make sure that, you know, those incidents are not going up as a result.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, with the lockdown, a number of food premises were closed for a large period of time. So that has affected the numbers of complaints that we've had and notifications of food poisoning. We did ensure that we maintained contact with the food businesses as much as possible to let them know that, that they were still on our radar. And we were using communication channels to get information out when businesses were reopening about ensuring their businesses were ready for reopening. I think we have seen that as businesses have reopened and maybe have had difficulties in recruiting staff, that has been reflected in some drop in standards in cleaning, but that hasn't. We haven't seen an increase in food poisoning cases.
Does any other member of the committee have any comments or questions to make? No, I mean, I just wanted to summarise, I suppose, by echoing the thoughts of others in terms of the excellent work in this area. And it's absolutely right. It is important. If you take your loved one to a restaurant, you want to make sure that you have a good time and that they have a good time and that they're not food poisoned and ruin it for the next few days. So the work of the officers here is to be commended, and I'm delighted to hear the comments made by many councillors in respect of that. So can I draw you back to page 69, which is to consider for approval by the Licensing Committee the attached draft Food Safety Service Plan for 2021-2022. And if you agree with that, can I ask you to please raise your hand? Thank you, that is unanimous. If we go on now to item number 7, which is on, I've lost my papers again, page 85, which is the Health and Safety Service Plan for 2021-22. And again, that's Mrs. Soper introducing that.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, committee, the purpose of this report is to consider for approval by the Licensing Committee the attached draft Health and Safety Service Plan for 2021-22. Health and safety law is enforced by officers employed by local authorities and the Health and Safety Executive. There are enforcing regulations that set out which activities are enforced by HSE and which by the local authority. And for local authorities, it is shops, offices, leisure and service sector premises. The Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 is the key piece of legislation that is enforced, and this is an umbrella for a variety of specific regulations underneath that. The local authorities are required to make arrangements for enforcement under Section 18 of the Health and Safety at Work Act, and there is a national local authority enforcement code that must be followed. The Surrey Heath Draft Health and Safety Plan 2021-22 is attached to Annex A. This plan sets out how the council will discharge its health and safety duties under the Health and Safety at Work Act, and includes a description of the activities that form the health and safety service. The plan takes account the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic, and as with the food service, the work that the environmental health team have been doing on COVID business restrictions has impacted on the delivery of health and safety at work. However, with the removal of the business restrictions and the new working safely guidance produced by the government and the HSE, this very much makes COVID-19 controls now part of an employer's Health and Safety at Work Act duties, and that is reflected in our service plan priorities. The service plan sets out the work that the council has in relation to health and safety in approximately 1,500 premises in the borough that come under local authority enforcement. And the work we do relates to advising new and existing businesses on compliance, investigating complaints and reports of accidents, and carrying out proactive visits and promotional activities, and taking in proportionate enforcement action where necessary. Also, under the health and safety service, we carry out the registration of skin piercing activities and to ensure that these are carried out safely. And we also work with event organisers through safety advisory groups to ensure that events can happen safely. The plan sets out the work that will be carried out in 2021 and 2022. And as I've said, this will mainly prioritise ensuring that local businesses are able to enforce appropriate COVID-19 controls. The recommendation is therefore that the Licensing Committee is advised to resolve that the draft Health and Safety Service Plan 2021-22 attached to Annex A to this report is approved. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments regarding that? No. Okay, well, let's go to the recommendation then on page 85, which is to consider for approval by the licensing committee the attached draft health and safety service plan for 2021-22. If you're in agreement with that, can I ask you to raise your hand? Thank you, and that is unanimous. So unanimously agreed. If I go on then to item number 8, which is Business and Planning Act 2020 pavement licence fees, which Mrs. Lolly is going to introduce for us.
Thank you, Chairman, again. I feel I'm telling you a little bit of a story, really, because following the enactment of the Business and Planning Act 2020, responsibility for granting pavement licences transferred from Surrey County Council in their capacity as the Highways Authority to Surrey Heath. In July 2020, the Licensing Committee received details of proposed arrangements for processing applications for these licences. These arrangements were approved and the application fee was set at £100. These were originally temporary arrangements which were due to come to an end on the 30th of September 2021. In March this year, to support businesses affected by the ongoing impact of COVID-19, the committee resolved to waive the discretionary fee of £100 until further review by the Licensing Committee. In addition, applicants for pavement licences were refunded the fee in cases where the fee had already been paid. The committee were also advised that it was likely that the temporary arrangements would be extended. In July, the Business and Planning Act 2020, in brackets, pavement licences, close brackets, in brackets, coronavirus, close brackets again, amendment regulations 2021 came into force. These regulations extended the provisions relating to pavement licences to 30th of September 2022 as anticipated. Brief details of these changes were provided in a verbal update to committee in July. I think these regulations had only just come into force that day, so we hadn't got enough time to give you anything more than a verbal update. We have subsequently received a number of applications for pavement licences to run from the 1st of October this year to the 30th of September 2022, or they can end before that, but that's the cut-off date. The application fees have been waived in accordance with the resolution made by committee in March. We are now seeking formal approval to continue to waive the fees for these applications, for any applications received after tonight's meeting as set out in the report. Further consideration may need to be given to this if there is a further extension to these regulations and arrangements, but that will come in due course depending on what happens. But we are seeking approval to continue to waive the fees as set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I invite any further comments, if I can draw your attention to paragraph 2.7 in the report, because there was a financial aspect to this, I did take the opportunity of discussing the matter with Councillor Perry, and his views are as indicated in there. I would obviously like spending council money, but I did think it was appropriate to get his views first. Councillor Deach.
Thank you. This is quite an easy one for me. Yes, we ought to support this. I work with quite a lot of businesses in the borough, as I know Councillor Adams does, some of which are in the hospitality, leisure and that type of sector, and they're struggling. It's really difficult. I know a lot of them are particularly struggling with recruitment of staff, but anything we can do to assist them, we should. And I know that this can be easily reviewed whenever we need to, and when things get better. So as far as I'm concerned, absolutely we should be supporting officers with this proposal. Thank you.
Councillor Garrett and then Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chair. I totally agree. I think we should carry this on. My only question is, if it expires on the 30th of September, if someone applied on the 29th of September, do they have to have a year? And would that mean then they would have a free year? It's just a pedantics, I know, but I'm just wondering if that's what the case was.
Mrs. Lolly?
I think if they applied on the 29th, we've got 5 days to actually process them. So I think, we would reflect it in the length of time they have their application. But at the moment, these licenses can only go until the 30th of September 2022. Okay.
Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a bit of a recommendation. If this is accepted this evening, can we please recommend that the executive member for business is contacted with a view to the council advertising the waiving of this fee to businesses to assist with the service priorities as described in paragraph 5.1.9 within the health and safety service plan to increase ventilation in public spaces.
Can you just confirm, you're asking us to make the business portfolio holder aware of the waiving of the fees?
Yeah, to be able to advertise it directly to the businesses so that we have a bigger uptake of businesses looking for these pavement licenses to increase ventilation within public spaces.
Okay, I have no objection to that, but Councillor White?
It's nothing to do with that, sorry. It's just, are ward councillors still consulted when someone makes an application within their ward? They are, okay.
Does anybody have any other comments or questions to make on that?
Mr. Chairman, can I make a comment?
Oh, sorry, Councillor. Sorry, Councillor Mansfield, you have got your hand up there. Yes, please do come in.
Thank you very much. Just really to reiterate what the previous councillors have noted to the fact that I fully support this, and anything to do with helping to generate business is something that we should certainly support. And I think that I agree also with Councillor Adams' points that I think any publicity we can give to this would be absolutely superb idea. I attended an eatery only yesterday on the Pavement in Camberley. I tried to get hold of you, Councillor Adams, but I think you were dissing me, see whether you'd join me. I fully support it. Fantastic. Well done.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions? And just in terms of the comments made by Councillor Adams, I mean, I'm happy just to send an email to the relevant portfolio holder rather than necessarily adding to the amendment, but I'm sure that will be noted in the minutes, and I would happily make them aware of that for ventilation reasons. So if I can draw you back to page 99, the committee is asked to resolve that the discretionary licence fee of £100 for all new pavement licence applications made under the Business and Planning Act 2020 is waived in light of the current and ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. If you're in favour of that, can I ask you to raise your hand, please? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. If we now go on to item number 9 on page 125, which I will just quickly take, that is merely to report decisions that have been taken in respect of licence applications that have been delegated, and there is Annex A on page 127. I'm not going to ask an officer to go through all of this, but if there are any questions, please indicate. No questions on that annex that I can see. So can I just, I think that is just for noting actually, isn't it? We don't need to do anything with that one. So if I then go on to item number 10, which is the work programme. So if I know there was a couple of things I did today about that as well. So if I draw your attention firstly to this mysterious December meeting, well, when we are looking at doing that is immediately before the full council meeting on the 15th of December. And the reason for that is because it is a single item and it's a time-bound one. So either we'll need to hold a very quick meeting then, or it's like you will need to hold a very quick meeting in April, one or the other. And it made sense to do it then. So the thinking would be that we would have a meeting which would be very short because it is only going to be for that one item. And at the moment, depending on whether the information is back, I'm going to ask members if they can just pencil in to have a meeting at 6:30 on that night. Now, we will confirm or otherwise whether that will take place. We will know by mid-November, but if I know it's easier to put a date in now and have it cancelled than the other way around. So there was an offer to have a meeting in the second half of December, which the Vice Chair and I declined because we didn't think you would be interested. So that's the reason for doing it. I know it might be a longer night, but it's just we're here anyway. So to save costs for officers and members, that was why we're suggesting that. It's the date of the full council meeting, which I think is the 15th of December. So the thinking would be the full council meeting would be at 7 and we would meet at 6:30. That's the thinking, because we're not expecting that to be particularly controversial. Should it look like it might be, obviously we may amend that meeting forward, but the thinking will be to hold it on that same night to avoid you coming out for more than one kind of thing on that night. So that's the idea. We will confirm that and we will know that by mid-November, and that will be confirmed at that stage. If I can then go on to the 16th of February, and there are 2 further items to add to the 16th of February 2022 work programme. I'm just check I'm reading my writing here. So firstly, it is to add the review of Hackney Carriage in brackets taxi fees, the feedback after the consultation, which we discussed earlier tonight. And secondly, review of Hackney Carriage taxi and private hire licensing fees. So the intention is that those 2 reports will be added to the 16th of February 2022 agenda. And is there anything else that is to be added or amended to that work programme? Have I got that right, officers? Good, thank you. Okay, can I therefore ask for your agreement that with the work programme before, if you agree with that, can I just ask you just to briefly raise your hand? Thank you, that is agreed. And that is the last item of tonight. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Councillor Mansfield, for dialing in and for other officers who have dialed in or are present here tonight. And we